We've got a couple of fellows here we've known a long time. They wrote a book called Corrupt Illinois, and they claim that, I guess we probably would agree, that Illinois is the most corrupt state and Chicago the most corrupt city. So with that, good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. You almost got it right. Chicago is the most corrupt city in America, but Illinois is only the third most corrupt state. We fall behind in a couple of measures, but we keep fighting for top place, and it's good to see Aaron Schock in there doing his best to get us back up to the top.
Well, I was a little surprised New Jersey was so far down the list.
Yes, New Jersey is bad. So is Louisiana, and both have corruption for the same reason we do. They're machine states.
2,000 people in elected office or public service convicted in Illinois. That seems like a pretty astonishing figure.
Convicted in federal court in Illinois since 1972. So that doesn't say anything about people that might have been convicted in state court or haven't been caught, or haven't been prosecuted.
I mean, it almost sounds like our own unique federal wing of some prison someplace.
Well, we do have 3 branches of the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office working on corruption. It's the most units studying corruption in America, and that's because we have the most corruption.
So as I lead into why corruption continues, I have to ask, are we proud as Chicagoans and Illinoisans having this kind of reputation? We seem to revel in trying to figure out just how many corrupt officials we can find and put away.
I think
it's a matter of pride because we want those garbage cans?
No, I don't think so. I think it is people are lost at what we should do about it. So their only response is, to make fun of it. And I think that's it hurts and it helps. One is there's an underlying feeling of the general public that the game is fixed and it's wholesale in Chicago. But we need to have a citizenry that is really working to change it. And we suggest some ways to change it, but it'll take time.
What we did was we have the most comprehensive study of corruption that has ever been made in Illinois, actually in any state in the country, because we wanted to, what you see is an event that happens. Schock or someone else is the corrupt figure of the week. But in fact, this is a continual pattern, and we try and outline the patterns of corruption, the cost of corruption, the history, and the cures. And therefore, we worked 8 years to do the research and to pull the facts together, 3 years writing the book itself.
I was in anticipation of you guys coming on the show. I started going through the Edgar Lee Masters poems on Spoon River, and I was searching for some because I remember hearing from the Broadway play a couple of political poems, but I didn't find it. But I certainly I think the history goes way back. How do you think that it started? You talk about machine politics and that being the way that they maintain control and allow for corruption. How did we emerge with a system, I guess we'll call it the machine system?
So we started back when we were a territory. The first governor of our territory thought that things were corrupt because the politicians were buying whiskey for the voters, and that was the standard way of campaigning. But the first serious problem was the sale of the Michigan-Illinois Canal. It's built in 1848. The federal government gave us land like they did the railroads to pay for it, and so we paid for the canal, and then the governor issued script and paid for it again, pocketed $250,000, which would be $25 or $50 million easily today. And that was the first corruption case, but it was a civil case. The first criminal trial was for 1869. We had a city hall that was a wooden building, and it was painted. It needed it. But they gave the contract of $127,000 to a crook. As they said in those days, the contracts had thievery written between the lines, and the reason they knew it was done with whitewash, and the whitewash was cheaper, but it also washed off in the first rains. That court case in 1869 sent 4 aldermen and county commissioners to jail. There were 14 indicted. Most of the rest lost their election in 1871. And we began the machine in 1871, and as the machine grew, we created a history of corruption that has led to a culture of corruption that continues in the Democratic and Republican parties even till today.
I think that that's one of the interesting things for people who pick up this book, Corrupt Illinois, by Dick Simpson and Tom Gradel, is that this is not just a Chicago machine politics kind of thing you're looking at. You're looking at city, state, county, judges, police. I mean, on all levels, we seem to have a culture of corruption. And so I ask again, is this something we kind of revel in? Is this just the way Midwestern sensibilities deal with politics and power?
I think it's traditional machine politics. It's just that in Chicago, the machine has lived on longer than it has in most other big cities. The machine did not start with the first Mayor Daley, but he perfected it. And when at its height, under Daley, they controlled not only the city of Chicago government and politics, but they also controlled Cook County. They also controlled the courts. They dominated the state legislature from time to time, and they could get their own candidate elected governor from time to time. And some people allege that they were also able to influence the selection of federal judges and federal prosecutors. We haven't seen that lately, but earlier on there was a lot of indication that was true. Such dominance eliminates competition, eliminates people that are able to bring the other side of the story, and it furthers the machine's power. So the more power they have, the more arrogant they are, the more they're willing to take chances with things, and they get away with it.
And the two other points about that. First of all, the classic case of William Lorimer, who everyone's forgotten, bought his U.S. Senate seat with bribes at the state legislature. They elected senators by the legislature then. That led to the constitutional amendment. Besides throwing him out of the Senate, it led to the constitutional amendment which brought the direct election of senators. As the machine has been very powerful, it has also spawned a very powerful reform movement. Saul Alinsky, Jane Addams, Lynn Dupre, Paul Douglas, Paul Simon, on down the list. There has been a fight against the machine, and we just haven't been able to be comprehensive enough to break the machine. Hopefully we'll begin to do that. And the second point is, it isn't just the evil machine in Chicago. The DuPage Republican machine is equally venal. It just happens they wear pinstripe suits.
So let's talk about pinstripe suits, because that is a key factor in how the machine has evolved to this day. You maintain it really didn't disappear, even though it's disappeared in other states or other cities. What's the face of the political apparatus we call the machine today?
I think they've switched from being totally patronage-based to being crony contract-based. What happens now is that there's a lot of campaign contributions that are given to people, and favors are done. Sometimes those can be prosecuted if there's evidence of a quid pro quo, but most of the time it's a favor done, and then a year later, or even before the favor is done, a government action is taken in order to satisfy it.
The classic of that was probably Rod Blagojevich. What he did was to appoint people to boards like pension boards. The pension board member would then make sure that the cronies got the contracts, and they would get a direct bribe of $1.5 million or more, and in return Blagojevich would get a campaign contribution of $250,000 or more. That's very similar to what Rahm Emanuel has done. It's not as clear whether they've crossed the line to criminal acts, but it's very clear that they've crossed the line to conflicts of interest that harm the citizens of Chicago.
One of those would be probably as one of his appointees, or maybe more than one, on the school board. There's a woman in the news.
Yes, and that's one of them. But he's also given direct contracts to people. The most insidious is probably the one least covered, which is the pension boards. They're giving contracts to agencies to spend our pension, to invest our pension money, and they're being able to still give direct campaign contributions to Rahm Emanuel on the claim, well, they're not getting a direct contract from the city, so they can go ahead and do it. That's just illogical.
You know, in the news, I think this morning I just saw a flash of it. Was on my little phone, but where the the city and Emmanuel have awarded a contract to Magic Johnson for janitorial services. Right? That's after they got rid of the union. Is that the same case at O'Hare?
Well, you're certainly right that Magic Johnson came and gave a nice campaign contribution to Rahm Emanuel, and then ended up with the contract for the schools. The privatization effort is going forward at a rapid pace in Chicago, and sometimes privatization can be legitimate, but it isn't legitimate when it's determined by who gives the most campaign contributions. I was impressed with the Tribune story of 60 campaign contributors to Rahm Emanuel's campaign that in turn were getting favors back, whether it was a direct contract or a ribbon cutting or some other appearance at a company event.
Now, I thought Emanuel's retort when confronted with it yesterday, saying, oh, well, he gave $10 million to a school program, as though that action eliminate any conflict of interest. It was actually, I think it confirms that there was a conflict of interest.
You know, one of the things I've been saying, and I have to develop it, and I probably didn't think of it myself, but with privatization, there's also a diminishment in democracy. Can you either of you address that?
Well, I think that's one of the key issues, in fact, in this campaign with Chuy Garcia. That we all know that we're going to have to choose a mayor who's going to confront a major fiscal crisis. And the real issue isn't, is there a perfect plan to solve the crisis in advance? The real question is, who will be at the table, whose voices will be heard? We're going to have cuts in services and increases in taxes. That's just the honest truth. The question is, will we have any voice in what they cut and in what revenue they raise? And with Chuy Garcia, you have a history that, yes, that's the way it will be, going all the way back to the Harold Washington period.
Now, some people feel that collaborative style means he won't be tough enough, particularly with the unions that are helping him get in. What do you say to folks who feel that there's a different kind of corruption when you have a progressive candidate like Chuy, who doesn't have the money that a Rahm has to run for office, but he's getting it all from the union?
Well, if Rahm was really tough, he would give the Inspector General all the information the Inspector General wanted and cooperate with investigations, which there's a lot of evidence that he doesn't. He hides behind lawyer-client privilege and not turning over information to the Inspector General. I think the toughness is a myth in American culture. That you have to be tough. I mean, everybody has to be the Marlboro Man, when he has to ride in on a horse with guns blazing. Good, solid government, good asking questions, good communications with the general public is what we need. And everybody's tough enough, and if somebody's not tough enough, we'll hire the people that are tough enough.
And on the corruption side, what we need is a comprehensive program that's going to take us decades to implement. It's going to require civic education in the schools, which we haven't taught for years in the public schools. It's going to take public funding of campaigns in the future, as this campaign is a perfect example of why we need public funding. It's going to take electing better officials. It's going to take more than just the usual transparency of dumping a bunch of data on the web. It takes actually the kind of data that citizens need to know how to vote in these aldermanic elections and these mayoral elections that are coming up. And that's only a part of the agenda. We need a comprehensive agenda and a citizenry that are dedicated for the next decade to eliminating corruption. We're not going to get that under Rahm Emanuel.
There are two other aspects of your book covering parts of corruption in our state and city that I think many people overlook. We have a judgment this morning in the Ron Cruz case of prosecutorial overreaction. Well, $20 million judgment. So the whole, I'm tying that to the police corruption thing that goes beyond the John Burge torture stuff, which has probably cost us as much as $100 million, a report said this week.
The Burge charges alone have cost us more than $100 million. And our estimate of the total corruption tax, what we pay for waste, what we pay for the reparations, like in the Burge case, it's more than $500 million a year. We could solve the pension crisis for the city if we could just eliminate corruption. $500 million a year in taxpayer money is a lot, and that's the lowest possible estimate based on the cases we've seen where we have the evidence of what it costs us. The hired truck scandal, for instance, cost us more than $15 million a year for more than a decade. That's $150 million just on crooked contracts to truck owners.
You're listening to the Live from the Heartland show, brought to you every Saturday morning on WLUW 88.7 Chicago Sound Alliance. I'm Michael James. I'm here with Tom Clark, and we are talking to Dick Simpson and Tom Gradel. We're talking about their new book, Corruption, Illinois.
And
So one other kind of behind-the-scenes aspect that you brought up is the mob. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the role of organized crime, both historically and perhaps even today. And I'll set you up a little bit. I remember the now Reverend Walter Coleman, who was known as Slim back in the organizing days, telling me between the first and second election of Harold Washington, I mean between the 70s and 83, that one of the things Harold was going to have to do is to figure out how to accommodate the first ward. This blew me away. But he said in order to govern the city, this is something you need to be aware of. The mob has influence. Now, Fred Rhodey and the First Ward, as we know it, as I knew it growing up, are gone. But is there still mob influence lurking behind the scenes in the city of Chicago?
That's hard to say unless it pops into the newspapers. We
don't want no pops.
We document a lot of instances in the past, including when Jane Byrne was mayor, sending two of her aides in to talk to the police commissioner and remove a policeman who was tough on the mob, remove him from his position. Dee Leonardi was demoted, and so was that police officer. They both ended up quitting. We have instances go way back. There was a congressman by the name of Roland Libinati, who was a First Ward, and actually he was a mob lawyer. He and his brother both represented various people in Capone's operation. Right? He was an congressman, and one of the things he did, somehow he got on the Judiciary Committee, but he went after Bobby Kennedy and went after the FBI and trying to limit all their powers, and anything that came up in Congress that would expand their powers, he would fight against. He was bumped out of office and replaced by Frank Annunzio, who was also a First Warder, who was in business with two mobsters in an insurance business.
But beyond what's happening with the mob, the big threat today in the area of crime is not the mob. The mob in the old days, like Al Capone bought the mayor when he supported Big Bill Thompson. But what's happening today is the street gangs are no longer going to the commander or the police chief. What they're doing is buying the cop on the beat in the special gang units. And that ends up in all of the killings that are happening in the south and west side of the city of Chicago. We not only have to fight against the mob and its influence in politics, we have to fight against the street gangs and their collusion in the drug sales. And we've had police officers actually run drug rings and crime rings. There is a serious problem of corruption throughout the police department that is beyond just what used to be the mob buying off the top commanders.
Yeah, you're talking in the book a little bit about payoffs, and it made me remember paying off a cop $5 one time when I got pulled over. It was pretty cheap. I don't know. Probably some of these guys are getting a lot more money. In starting to look over the book, I remembered a name that came up, and this may be a little obscure, but there was a guy named Clyde Choate, and I think he was the in the legislature. Is that anything that rings a bell or brings up any memories? Because you do talk in the book about there were some reform governors in our state. Altgeld, I think you maybe mentioned Walker. Maybe Quinn would be considered. Maybe so. I got a couple questions there. Clyde Choate and
Clyde Choate was a power in the legislature when Walker first became governor. In fact, when I was on the staff of Walker, we would fly from Chicago to Springfield, and generally the governor, not me, but the governor and several other people would be playing what they called Clyde Choate poker, which was a form of pinochle and poker, and I don't even today remember the rules. I couldn't find anything of him actually being
Yeah, he's not
in a
in the
major
index.
scandal.
Yeah.
And although he was considered very powerful, and I don't, I have no
Okay, that
evidence
was just
on your-
obscure. There was.
On your issue about reform governors, Pat Quinn, when he became governor, did appoint an ethics commission, and they did make recommendations. Two of the recommendations were adopted, one for more disclosure. They weren't able to get public funding through. They weren't able to get some of their other recommendations through. Sheila Simon was another member of that commission. The governors have from time to time, just like some of the mayors like Harold Washington, attempted to curb this corruption, but it really takes a sustained period. One term isn't long enough, and we don't have enough sustained attention to the effort. We've got bills pending in Springfield right now to require civic and education in the public schools. We've got bills for more transparency than we have currently to protect the freedom of information, methods that allow the newspaper to get the information that they need to do the stories. This is an important session in Springfield, not just about the budget, but about moving forward the reform agenda. And what we try and do in the book is lay out the entire agenda. We don't say everybody should do all 8 things. We say everybody should take up a piece of the action and follow it through on their own.
So what would be 2 things people listening to this program could do rather than just sit on their hands to move this long-term agenda for reform forward?
2 things would be immediate. One is the civic education bill is pending in Springfield. It's 4204 and 4205 in the House. And in City Hall, Common Cause is going to put forward, based on the referendum that passed in 38 wards, public funding of future city elections. Now, that'll be a hard sell in the City Council, but aldermen are having to raise about $300,000 to be able to be successful in running their campaigns now. So even the aldermen are tired of having to be beholden to the special interests to raise that much money. That isn't the kind of thing that a $5 contribution from a constituent will allow you to raise.
Dick, we
the
can't
other
let you go before I ask you, how do you think the mayoral campaign is going now with 2 weeks to go?
Well,
early voting starting on Monday.
Chewy has momentum, but he's going to have enough people going door to door, person to person, and making personal phone calls to get over the hump. If he doesn't have that momentum, it won't matter. He's been lucky to get enough money to run the TV ads, and that will help, but he has to have the person-to-person contact, just like we did in the old days with IPO, and it was that door-to-door contact that made the difference. It's what elected Will Guzzardi, for instance, the state legislator. All progressive campaigns have to have the door-to-door, person-to-person contact. If Chewy has it, he will win. If he doesn't have it, he will lose.
Well, I'll be out there this afternoon and through the
Great.
weekend. Great weather to do precinct work and great way to meet your neighbors and find out what they're preparing to do this spring and summer.
And if any of your audience wants copies of the books, we'll be glad to sign them here at the Heartland Cafe, the great cafe on the north side of Chicago.
Hallelujah.
The book is Corrupt Illinois by Tom Gradel and Dick Simpson. We appreciate you guys coming. Let's have a round of applause for our authors looking at Corrupt Illinois.